Good afternoon and good morning to everyone. So today I'm gonna talk about some of the experiments that we have been running at the main study of understanding society on response maximization. So I want to start just giving you a few details about how understanding society works. So understanding society is the UK household longitudinal study. It started in 2009, and at that initial point, it comprised more than 40,000 households. In the beginning, it followed a face-to-face fieldwork strategy until wave 8, in which it moved sequentially to a web and face-to-face mixed mode strategy. At wave 10, there was a copy ring fence, which was a random sample of the 20% of the full sample that was allocated to face-to-face. Then there was a 10% low web propensity group that was also allocated to copy first. And finally, the remaining 70% was allocated to the web first, and the non-respondent were followed by face-to-face. Households are invited every year to take part in the survey, and there is a household questionnaire, and there is also an adult and children questionnaires for each household member. Due to COVID-19, and this is important for the experiments that I'm going to present, because the fieldwork of those experiments started right after the outbreak of the pandemic. So from the end of March of 2020, all samples, regardless of the fieldwork protocol that it was originally allocated, was moved to a sequential web and CATI sequential mixed mode. So the web non-respondents were then followed by the telephone mode. Response maximization. So as we have just heard, the main issue here is that in the last decade we have observed how the response rate have declined. So one of them, there are some survey features that we can manage to increase that, to increase the response rate. And at the same time that we increase the response rate, we can have a look at the fieldwork costs. In this case, today, I'm going to talk about two experiments. The first experiment is about the use of SMS in the contact strategy. So understanding society traditionally use letters and emails. And today we're going to see the effect of adding SMS to that contact strategy. So the objective of adding those contacts is to increase the contact rate and also the cooperation. Another feature that we modified in one of the experiments are the incentives. We tried, in line what we just have heard from the PSID, we tried higher incentives for the web respondents and for the unconditional incentive. Okay, so let's start with the first experiment I want to talk about today, the use of SMS to increase web response. A mixed mode contact strategy can increase response rate. This is not new. The combination of letters and emails has been there for a while, and other modes. In a sequential mixed mode survey, in addition to increase response rate, if we push the web response, we can help to reduce fieldwork costs. And that was the objective of our first experiment. There are some evidence about the use and the positive effect of SMS in survey research, but mainly focusing cross-sectional web surveys. Today, we present the effect in understanding society, longitudinal mixed mode, sequential mixed mode survey. The research questions for this first experiment, the first one is about the response rates. I present today about the response rates is whether the use of these SMS would increase the response rate, and whether there is some subgroups that could benefit more from using SMS. And then In today's presentation, I also look at some indicators of fieldwork effort at the CATI stage to see whether using those SMS could contribute to reduce fieldwork effort and survey costs. A bit of the design of this experiment. This experiment was part of the year 2 and wave 11 of Understanding Society and ran from April to September 2020. The experiment initially was designed for the web first subsample, which is the one that had the opportunity to complete the web questionnaire. But due to the COVID-19 pandemic, all the other subsamples, Fieldwork's protocols were moved to the web plus CATI strategy and were part of the experiment. In this experiment, basically there was 4 experimental groups. The control group, the first group, received the usual letter and emails, combination of letter and emails. Then, in addition to that, the first treatment group received an SMS invite with a short text and the survey link. The second treatment group received, on top of the usual contact strategy, 2 SMS reminders, and finally the third treatment group received both the SMS invites and the reminders, so in total 3 SMS. For the analysis that I'm going to present today, I'm going to focus on the compliance sample. Why? Because we have part of the sample did not provide a valid email or mobile phone before the fieldwork of wave 11. And then I also focus on the web first and the CAPI ring fence subsamples. So I exclude the low web propensity cases from the analysis. And the reason to do that is that in the future, when we want to implement, to extend the implementation of this experiment, if the results say that it has a positive effect, we would not do in the low web propensity cases. So let's start. So the first set of results are the response propensities after the web. What you observe here on the left-hand side is the web first and CAPI ring fence. Here you have the compliant and the non-compliant cases. And what we see is that when we send the SMS, we observe a higher response propensity for the SMS invite and slightly higher for the SMS reminders and the invite plus reminders compared to the control group. However, these differences are not significant. If we zoom into the compliant cases, so those who provided mobile and email, what we observe is that the use of SMS reminders has a positive effect on the response propensities. Specifically for the SMS reminders group and the SMS invite plus reminders, the response rate increased by 6.7 percentage points. Now, let's have a look at the subgroups. In the subgroup analysis, we test a set of moderators in which we included social demographics, we included behavioral variables, like, for example, smartphone use, internet use, and past survey participation in the study. And what we found here, you have a summary of the most interesting results. Young sample members, younger sample members, are more likely to react positively to the SMS, especially when they receive the reminders. Another group that it's kind of important is irregular respondents, those who responded to less than 2/3 of the waves that they were invited in. For this group, we also observed a positive effect. Finally, those more educated, those with a degree, also exhibited a positive effect. Let's now move to fieldwork effort. Here, what you have are 3 measures three indicators of fieldwork effort. In the first, on the left-hand side, is the full household response rate after web. So the households where they completed the household questionnaire and all the individual questionnaires. So they were not follow up to the CATI fieldwork. We observed there that yes, the response rate is slightly higher for the households that receive the reminders, but these are not significant. Also, the average number of calls is lower for the household that receive the SMS invites and the SMS invites or reminders. However, again, the differences are not significant. A final measure that we looked at was a average length, call length in minutes per household. What we observe here is that for the SMS reminders group, the minutes of the average number of minutes is slightly higher compared to the control group, which is kind of unexpected. But at the same time, this is this difference not significant. And now let's switch to the incentives. So the second survey feature that I want to, so we have tried to modify in an experiment are the incentives at understanding society. So we know that unconditional incentives can increase survey participation. We also know that we can use incentives to push sample members to cheaper modes and make them more attractive. So if our starting point is the incentive system of understanding society, and what we observe, what we do at the moment is for the last wave, responding adults receive a £10 unconditional incentive. Then the last wave non-responding adults from responding household at the last wave, they receive a conditional £10 incentive. And the last wave, non-responding adults at non-responding household receive a £20 conditional incentive. Finally, since wave 8, when the web mode was introduced, there is an early bird bonus. This early bird bonus is for those who complete the web survey within 5 weeks before the CATI, the interviewer administered fieldwork starts. So the higher incentives, what are we going to look at here? Today I'm going to present first the early bird bonus. The first incentive that we modified for this experiment is the early bird bonus. And I want to look at the response rate once at the web stage, once we double the early bird bonus. And then the second question is kind of separate, it's about the unconditional incentive. Unconditional incentive is only given to those that responded to the last wave. And here we want to test at the end of the fieldwork whether the response rate is higher. Then both questions are set for a set of moderators. Let's have a look at the design. So in the higher incentives experiment also took place between April and September 2020, but this was at wave 8, year 1 of wave 12, sorry. And in this experiment, there are 3 groups, 3 experimental groups. The control group received the usual incentives, and then the higher unconditional incentive group received, instead of £10 unconditional incentive, £20 unconditional incentive. Finally, the third group, the higher early bird bonus, instead of receiving the £10 incentive, received £20 incentive. So the households were allocated to these 3 experimental groups, in which 2 of the incentives unconditional, the early bird bonus, were doubled from 10 to £20. Some of the results. So here on the left-hand side, the first plot is about the higher early bird bonus. And what you observe there are the response rate for the control and the higher early bird bonus groups for the web and for the web plus CATI. at the end of the fieldwork. What we observe is that the response rate at the end of the web phase of the fieldwork is 3.7 percentage points higher, and this difference is significant. At the end of the fieldwork, after the cutting stage, the difference gets lower and is about 2.4 percentage points, and it's no longer significant. If we go to the right-hand side, what you see is the higher unconditional incentive experiment, and we look at this in the last wave responding adults subsample. And what we observe here is the opposite. So after the web, the experimental group, those who receive the higher unconditional incentive, exceeded a higher but non-significant response rate, 1.9 percentage points. And at the end of the fieldwork, this difference increases to 2.7 percentage points. So yes, the higher early bird bonus, that's what we expected it to do, which is increase the web response rate, and the higher unconditional incentive increases especially the overall final response rate. Let's have a look by subgroups here. And again, what I'm showing here are the main results of the moderators analysis. For the higher early bird incentive, what we observe is that younger people again tend to react more positively to the higher incentive. And also, it's not significant, but the effect size is slightly higher in those from ethnic minorities and especially the web first of sample compared to the copy ring fence. If we go to the higher unconditional, the response rate at the end of the fieldwork is especially higher again for younger groups, and also for males and those from rural areas. For one subgroup that this difference was especially high was the low web propensity group, this copy first group that was moved due to the COVID to the web protocol, and in this case, the last web respondents from the low web propensity exceeded a quite high effect due to the higher unconditional incentive. So finally, some conclusions. Overall, the reminder SMS slightly increases the response for the compliance sample. So the two reminders has a positive effect, and this positive effect is especially strong for two groups that are of interest because they tend to have lower response rates. I'm talking about younger panel members and irregular respondents. Then we have no evidence that adding these SMS have a negative effect on the fieldwork efforts. And when we move to the incentives, what we know is that both incentives makes their job. The conditional incentive increases the web completion, and the unconditional incentive increases the final completion. Maybe here what we have, and I finish with this, is whether these response maximization experiments and exercise should be generalized for the whole sample as a general strategy, or whether we should move to targeted designs in which, in this case, for example, younger panel members and irregular respondents, we make sure they receive that SMS, but not necessarily, for example, all the members of the sample. Also, by the way, talking about the benefit for us that we work with longitudinal data, that we can use all that auxiliary information from past waves to inform these targeted designs of the future. So thank you very much.